Hi guys, this is Mrs. D. This is a film of the background information and terms that you need to know in order to read, understand, and analyze Animal Farm. Make sure you take accurate notes. You'll be able to use these notes on a quiz in class. So this book falls into three different genres of literature. It can be considered either a satire, an allegory, or a fable. And I'm going to apologize if you hear babies, toddlers, and the Angry Birds movie in the background. I'm doing this from my living room right now. So, a satire is a literary genre that uses irony, wit, and sometimes sarcasm to expose humanity's vices and foibles, giving impetus to change and reform through ridicule. A lot of big words. So, essentially, what a satire is it uses humor, it uses irony, it's funny, it's sarcastic, but the purpose is to change something that the author thinks is wrong with society, and it's supposed to change that and it makes society better. So it might generate laughter, but more so it has a moral purpose. So it can be sort of abusive, but the abuse isn't the main purpose. The main purpose is to provoke reform. Make sure you get all of this definition down because it's very important. Feel free to pause the film as you need to in order to get your definitions down. So some popular satires you might be familiar with are Saturday Night Live. So, for example, if you've been watching lately, Donald Trump is often done by Alec Baldwin. And they also poke fun at Hillary Clinton too. So again, they're poking fun at these people, but they're also trying to change, some of the things they think might be wrong with politics right now. So moving on to allegory. Allegory can be tricky. So allegory is the presentation of an abstract idea through more concrete means. And there's often two levels of meaning. So there's the surface plot, right? There's a surface story, but that surface story or plot symbolizes a much deeper meaning, which is often political, religious, or philosophical in nature. You might be familiar with The Walking Dead. It's one of my favorite shows. So, on the surface, it's merely kind of an entertaining zombie story. However, if you look at it more closely and you examine the meaning underneath, it explores the good and evil traits humankind exhibit when they're faced with adversity. So, it is an allegory for kind of the good and evil lurking within mankind. Fable, you're probably pretty familiar with Fable. So it's a short fictional story that has a moral that we're supposed to learn by the end of the story. And fables often feature animals as their primary characters, like the tortoise and the hare. So, the whole moral of that story is slow and steady wins the race. So, what this book is it represents the Russian Revolution, which I know you studied in Mr. Wolf's class. So, the Russian Revolution began in 1917 with the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. His wife, and his many children were murdered. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, took control of Russia after the overthrow, and the major causes were some major economic disparity. The rich people were living very, very rich, very, very well, as did the king and his family, and the poor were living very, very poorly, starving, no money. It was pretty bad. Tsar Nicholas also regularly disbanded Duma, which was the Russian version of parliament, whenever they disagreed with him. So the working people, the working class, lost their voice and their say in government. And lastly, Russia had some major, major losses with World War One. So all of this created some discontent with the Russian ruling family and allowed for the working class to kind of come together and overthrow the monarchy. So the Romanov family was the ruling family of Russia until 1917, and it was headed by Tsar Nicholas II. He was dethroned during a battle called the February Revolution, and his family was murdered July 17th, 1918. And this is a picture of them over here. They were taken into their family's basement, they were shot, and in some tales, I've heard that they actually dipped the bodies in acid to get rid of the remains. Vladimir Lenin took control of Russia right after the Tsar's murder. And he was the one who was responsible for plotting to kill Tsar Nicholas and his family. And he was influenced by the teachings of a man named Karl Marx, who we'll talk about in just a little bit. So he was the leader of the Bolsheviks, Russian Socialist Democratic Workers' Party, and he seized control of government. And after that happened, Russia became known as the USSR, and he was the first leader of that. And he was succeeded by Stalin when he died. Stalin was even worse than Lenin. He was a Soviet dictator, And he came to power again after the Russian Revolution, and he was dictator of Russia from 1929 to 1953. So he had quite a long rule. When you consider that our presidents can only be leader for 8 years, his dictatorship was awful. It was marked by oppression and the execution of anyone who disagreed with him or dissented against his leaderships and his beliefs. He often sent people to concentration camps, death camps, and work camps, much like you kind of recall that Hitler did during World War II. Leon Trotsky, he was the Commissar of Foreign Affairs under Lenin, and he believed in pure and fundamental communism for the benefit of the people. So, whereas Lenin and Stalin were using this notion of communism and socialism, and then they kind of took that and created a totalitarian dictatorship out of it, Trotsky believed that communism and socialism should benefit the people. So he had some major theory disputes with Lenin and Stalin, and he stood up to them, and they did not like that. So he eventually was exiled from the USSR. He ran off to Mexico, and Stalin actually had him tracked down in Mexico and assassinated, which I find to be pretty amazing considering the lack of technology in the early 1900s. They were able to track him down from Russia all the way in Mexico and kill him. Karl Marx, although he was not involved in the Russian Revolution in any way, shape, or form, his book and his teachings influenced this revolution. So he was a German philosopher and revolutionary, and he wrote a book called Das Kapital, and this was what made him known as the father of socialism. Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky based all of their beliefs off of his teaching, among many other socialists. The socialist movement was huge throughout Europe and Central and South America and on into Asia during this time. In Marxism, they believed in a classless society, so there would be no upper, middle, and lower class. All people would be kind of on a level playing field. There were no profits. Everybody would benefit equally from the gross output of labor in the country. The whole point of Marxism is to satisfy the needs of all, and it was supposed to give power to the workers and not to the ruling class. But often that was not the case, as you'll see when we read this book. Lastly, we're going to talk about the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church. So they split from the Roman Catholic Church in 1054, but it's very, very similar in its doctrine and belief. It is the second largest church in the world. When Lenin came to power, he outlawed the church, sold church property, and then they started teaching atheism in schools. When you think about it, if you want to be a fascist dictator and you want to be large and in charge, you don't want religion. Religion gives people a higher power and a higher person to kind of answer to. So the whole point was to destroy religion, teach atheism, and then everybody's allegiance would be to the government. And Stalin was rumored to have tortured clergy and sent them to concentration and labor camps. But eventually, towards the end of Stalin's reign, he allowed the church to come back because it made him look good. So that is the end of the notes. Make sure you get all this copied in your guided notes. The quiz will be later this week, and you may use these notes to help you on the quiz. Thank you so much.